um, I will focus on anything that is not my dissertation.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Fair.
Yeah.
That.
I've fallen down a rabbit hole of trying to figure out what textiles were common to like the native peoples of North America, and specifically like in the American Southeast prior to European contact.
Ooh, I imagine that information is kind of hard to find.
It's kind of hard to find, but
considering
it's really
the genocide and all.
Yeah, yeah. And also people forget that like so up to 90% of the native population in North America died by novel diseases, right?
Oh.
So, right? Yeah, so it wasn't that, like, when Europeans came to North America, like, smallpox had already been brought via trade routes up from Central and South America and the Spanish contact, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
Up into North America, and you'd already had 100 years of the populations being decimated.
We should have worn our bunny hats.
Oh, I've got mine next to me, but it might be
Hold on, I got mine too!
Start.
I can still hear you, so keep talking.
Yeah, anyway, so, it's really cool, but, so there's not a lot of, artifacts about, like, textiles from pre-European contact. But that is mostly to do with just, like, the environments are not ideal, like, to preserve, especially, like, in the southeast region where I'm interested, right? But there is, like, exactly one that was a woven piece of cloth made from nettle fiber, which I thought was really cool. Because nettle fabric, woven nettle fabric is like the oldest piece of human-made fabric as an artifact that exists in the world. There's one that's tens of thousands of years old and found in like somewhere in like Europe of the Indo-European peoples. Anyway,
I just love how it's an entire like just deep dive into not working on your dissertation, which you're supposed to be working on.
Also bark cloth, which is a very cool cloth that's made from getting the inside of mulberry trees and pounding it. I love your ears. Oh my god. I still love this is my rabbit hat.
I love that hat.
I love this hat. I loved the energy it brought to that game. I felt like I was the goth girl, or the girl dressed like Batman amongst all the girls dressed like Disney princesses. And I was
he had like 3 Barbies. It was great.
Yeah, and then me. I was like, this was my childhood though.
And then Cthulhu the Furby.
Yeah, Cthulhu the Furby. Like, I often sort of missed the intent of the vibe as a kid. And went real hard into something weird. Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, Maddie. Say hello, everybody.
Hello. Hi, friends.
We're here to be double rabbits today, and we're going to talk a little bit about climate change. And Maddie has a little bit of a profession in this field.
I do. I can't keep wearing this. I'm gonna die of heat stroke. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fair.
It's June in Oklahoma, so no.
That is fair.
Okay. So we're going to talk about climate change.
This is also Debate Hub, and I'm Chesh. Hi. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm Maddie. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Oklahoma in meteorology. And I actually study Arctic sea ice and its interactions with the atmosphere and the ocean. That's what my dissertation is on. And like what causes basically, because of climate change, sea ice does this thing now where in the summer, that elusive Northwest Passage exists, right?
Oh,
and it didn't.
That makes sense.
20 years ago, right? And climate change is actually the effects of climate change are twice as fast at the poles because of the ice albedo effect. So albedo is how shiny an object is, right? And so Earth's global albedo is about 0.3, so that means about 0.7 because it's backwards. So what that means is that about 30% of sunlight that gets it to Earth is reflected off and never interacts with our atmosphere, right? So we lose that much energy off the top. But ice turns out very, very shiny, right? And so as we lose ice, that actually changes the Earth's albedo locally at the poles. And so the poles are now absorbing more and more energy. So it's this positive feedback loop. That's called Arctic amplification. And so that's definitely a climate thing that's very well studied and is my research isn't like my research is really on like the consequences of that, right? And so now that we lose more sea ice in the summer, so hey, when and where are those shipping lanes going to be open? Are they going to open this year in time for us to like use them? So that's what my research is on. And so in this world of climate change and climate science, and yeah,
I imagine you enjoy the flat earthers.
Their stuff is nonsense, and it is so silly. I absolutely refuse to get into discussion about like a photograph, right?
Well,
I will not engage in that
photorealism
conversation.
Even is, right? There's not a real standard,
right? Yeah. All I want is for a flat earther to explain to me what causes hurricanes to spin and what causes them to spin in opposite directions when we are north or south of the equator. That's it. That's my question. Please explain that to me.
You're nicer than I am. My question is, show me that the moon's not made of cheese.
Okay. I work off of, I have a tendency because like I'm not TAing right now, which is nice. I get to just focus on research as I am like, by golly, I'm trying to finish my dissertation this year. I don't know if it's going to happen, but we're going to try.
We believe in you.
Hey, thanks, team. So I don't have to teach right now, but like I love teaching and I love teaching like the science elective classes to non-majors. And so in those classes I get wacky questions. But they're all really fun. Like my favorite was this kid. This is actually when I taught in the Navy and I was teaching physics to kids in the Navy. I say kids, these are adults who have enlisted in the military, but they're like 18, 19.
Right.
Sorry, I have a cough. Baby shared her cold. Wasn't that nice of her?
Of course. Sharing is caring.
Yeah. And before we get much further, Chesh, I don't know if you're aware, but today in the U.S. is Juneteenth.
Yes, it
which is.
I did hear about
Yeah, so it's Juneteenth. So it's a great day to like if you're a white person, like support Black owned businesses if you're financially able to, or maybe take a minute, reflect on what that would mean. It's a complex holiday. I'm learning how to navigate it, so I'm certainly not an authority, but yeah. Anyway,
hey,
so
just be conscious and don't be assholes. Go at it.
Don't be an asshole. Don't be a dick is a great rule. Yeah.
Just take an extra day to think about not being a dick or being an asshole.
Love it. Yeah, there we go. Let's at least start there. Right?
So
I totally lost my train of thought. I'm sorry.
We have wildfires up in Ontario right now and in Alberta.
Okay.
Now they are a yearly thing, and Quebec. Yeah. They are a yearly thing. They happen every year. A lot of the times they are set up on purpose, so that way it kind of helps manage those forested areas, so that way we don't get what we're kind of getting now. And those fires are out of control. So much so that they've, like, what is it, the Midwest that they've managed to whoosh their way into?
Yeah. And that's also, so different atmospheric patterns will make that better or worse, right? You could have a raging wildfire up in Canada, but if you have like a strong jet stream that meandered south, it would like keep all that nasty air in Canada. Right. But like if you're unlucky and that would be very unlucky for Canadians, right? But if the winds shift, on the whole, right, you're going to affect more people, but it would have like less pollution per person. So I don't know if that would be a total more positive effect. So first thing, quick PSA, good God, if you smell smoke, if your air is hazy, or if it's hazy 3 towns away, wear a mask. Get that N95, because that particle size, which is the PM 2.5, is like the most dangerous particles for your lung health. They have the ability to like physically destroy your lungs.
Oh, we had warnings going out in my area. It was like, it wasn't too smoggy down, but it was like
Yeah.
overcast like crazy, and so it was just like, nope, pollution warning.
Yeah.
Stay inside as much as you can. I had the dog inside; he was not happy.
Yeah, yeah. Pets are going to be very sensitive to
You could
that.
smell it in the air too.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like, if you can already smell it, it's too late. You needed to have
Yeah.
already been wearing a mask.
Yeah.
So that's just a like a public safety thing, right? Definitely you want to protect your lungs. So look at changing your air filters in your house, right? If you guys have like
That's
central
a
heat and air, I don't
really
know how
good
Canada works.
idea. Go check your
Yeah,
air filters for like if you have an
check
air
your air
conditioner, you got a heater.
filters. Hmm.
You need to check both
Yeah,
of them.
check those. And a poor man's air filtration system is you can get a box fan and a store bought filter and just run that through your house, right? To help clean that out. Especially if you have young kids, right? So
Yes.
like globally, like lung disease from pollution in children under the age of 5 is like that's one of the biggest like global health concerns for kids that age. Like,
So
past, are they getting enough calories?
there
Um,
is a lady politician in the Texas of
okay.
Canada, which is Alberta.
The Texas, oh, which is Alberta. Okay.
Yes, the Texas of
Yeah.
Canada, who is the conservative premier of that area.
Okay.
Her name is Danielle, I believe, and she recently got elected, and she is running around saying that none of the fires that have been happening up here are related to climate change at all.
Okay, so that's a really bold claim. So let me go over. Here's my little spiel.
Please
Of
do.
like climate change and how it affects you as an individual 101, because that is an incredibly difficult and complex question. So, and that's kind of a problem with how we communicate about climate change, because what people want to know is, well, how is that going to affect me in the next year, right? And that is almost an impossible question to answer. Because when we're studying climate, we're studying the effects over large areas and large periods of time. Whereas what you and I experience day to day is weather, not climate, right? We experience how hot is it today in my town is weather. That is a local region and short timescales. Is it going to rain next Tuesday is a weather question. A climate question is 20 years from now, will it rain more on average in my area then than it does now, right? That's a type of climate question.
Right.
But anyway, but the easiest way to think about how climate change and global warming is likely to affect you and where you live is think about the sort of natural disasters that are weather related that you experience, right? So wildfires are one of those.
Tornadoes or blizzards,
Yeah,
or really
yeah.
bad
So
thunderstorms, anything like that.
exactly. So here in Oklahoma, we get really bad thunderstorms. We get really bad thunderstorms. We get drought. We get like hail. Straight line winds are a problem. Ice storms. The best way to understand how climate change is going to affect us down here is that all of those things are going to get worse, right? So we'll tend to experience if like droughts maybe more often or maybe at the same frequency but more severe, right? We might experience like more tornadoes or the same number but more severe, if that
Right.
kind of, which it's with storms. Climate models suggest that you're likely to it's not likely not to change frequency, but sorry, other way around. It's not likely to change intensity, but it is likely to change frequency. So you're going to be hit with more storms where the distribution, the average strength is the same, but now that you have more storms, you're also more likely to hit those extremes, right?
Which can be a major problem when it comes to anything related to crops. And that's one of the things
Absolutely.
that I've seen
Yeah.
people complaining about recently as it comes to these
Mhm.
wildfires and how this has been affecting what Canada is doing
Crops.
and what is there's drought now. It's all
Yeah.
everything
So
is
there's
incredibly dry because the type of snow that we got this past winter. Also,
Mhm.
on my unfinished journey for 2 said, "Isn't Canadian Wildfire a brand of whiskey?" Maybe.
Maybe.
Spicy whiskey.
Excellent. So there are topography reasons that Alberta is going to tend to be kind of dry and prone to drought. And that's for our friends at home. That is because it is on the leeward side of the Rocky Mountains. So air comes off the Pacific Ocean. It runs smack dab into the Rocky Mountains, right? And then that air gets forced up and over the mountain. As we force that air up, it's going to tend to form clouds and rain. So on the windward side, the side that the wind hits, you get lots and lots of rain, right? This is why Seattle is rainy. And then as that air moves up and over the mountain, it's deposited and lost most of its water. So the side of the mountain that is on the opposite side, the leeward side, that tends to be very dry in comparison to the windward side. So Alberta, that's where it's kind of positioned, right? And so again, there's just, because of mountains, that region is going to be more prone to drought, or just be a little more dry than maybe some neighboring regions.
In general.
Yeah, so that's kind of if we're broadly speaking. And so, so if that's a region that's already prone to drought, right, then climate change is going to make that type of drought like more common.
More frequent.
Right.
You're right. As you were
in
saying,
general,
it wasn't
more frequent.
it wasn't an intensity problem, it's a consistency problem. So it's not that the drought is worse, it's that the drought is more and longer because it is, you're getting it more frequently.
Yes. Yeah, so what you're going to see in regions, in regions where you have sort of like a drought and rainy kind of handoff, right? You're going to see the drought season become more drought-like, and that rainy season get even more rain.
And in our
here's
case,
what that does.
It's snow.
Snow, sorry, yes. But you'll see this anywhere there's monsoons, like the Indian monsoon, right? That's kind of the droughts become more severe, and when you get rain, you get even more. And this is why that's bad for crops, okay? Really dry dirt is bad at absorbing moisture, right?
Yes.
So the ground that is the best at absorbing and holding on to moisture is sort of neutral dirt, right? It hasn't recently rained. It's not super dry. It has a little moisture, right? Because when there is just like no moisture in that soil, and then you dump torrential downfall, torrential or just a massive amount of water gets on it, it doesn't stay. It just keeps moving. And you might see how that's going to make, now that's even though you're getting a ton of like precipitation, the soil can't hold on to it. So now when we get to the drought season, the drought is now even worse, which makes it harder to hold on to moisture next season, which makes the runoff problem worse, which makes this. So it's a positive feedback loop, right? And so like warming is kind of, think of, and this is me like speaking very much to a lay audience, right? This isn't,
of course. We're all look at this hat. Do I look like I'm not a lay audience to you?
Yeah.
I will fly away.
Yeah, this is my like pop science explanation, right? Not my like peer-reviewed paper explanation. But my kind of general understanding is like, think of the warming driving the drought, right? And then everything else is sort of that feedback loop feeding off of it.
Yeah, once
right?
it
That's
starts,
not a bad
it's
way
like when you flush the toilet. You may have only hit one handle, but the whole thing's gonna swirl down and out it goes.
The whole thing's gonna swirl, exactly. And so those drought conditions are gonna make it more likely for these wildfires to occur. The drought is also going to be affecting larger areas, right? Because that's another part of the severity of drought. And so that's going to allow wildfires, it's going to make it easier for them to spread further. And so like, sorry, I saw Smitty referencing that the Goa'uld like to hang out in Vancouver, and
Yep.
as a Stargate nerd myself.
Yep.
Oh my gosh, I love that series. But yeah, every planet looks like Vancouver, turns out.
I can't imagine how that would have happened.
Yeah.
It's really weird that a lot of the Midwest America also looks an awful like Vancouver if you happen to be if you happen to be a couple of brothers ghost hunting.
Amazing. My other favorite game you can play with Stargate if you've obsessively watched it for all of it as I have, is you can see when they have used every small time actor in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And you start to see actors repeating, right, in background characters.
Have you ever done that with Xena and Hercules? Because they took the crew and traveled? Oh, because they didn't, they filmed when they traveled when they filmed. So, like, Xena shows up in Hercules as Xena, but also as the wife of, like, a centaur. And, like, there's, like, you can see them, like, just trading off in both series because they were getting filmed at the same time, at the same location.
Oh my god, I love it.
It's super funny.
I love it. It's really funny. No, Stargate's pretty good about, like, not giving, like,
hiding them?
About hiding them, except when it's Stargate SG-1 versus Stargate Atlantis. Right?
Oh, they don't bother.
Which are same universe, and they don't bother.
That's amazing!
Because I feel like they didn't count on, no. I started watching these when I was 14. Have seen every season multiple times.
That's amazing.
Nobody will notice. Have you met sci-fi fans?
No. So one of the things that I think is like a little bit of like that gets a little bit sticky, right? Is people will complain when it comes to these fires. They'll be like, well, but the fires are only bad because they got out of control. So you might blame like a budget cut, for example. So like Doug Ford cut the budget in Ontario by 60% for fire stuff. Which is very large numbers. So in saying that, like, well, if the budget hadn't been cut, maybe the wildfires wouldn't be as much of a problem. Sure, but it doesn't really change that maybe the budget should even be higher if this is the current scenario, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're thinking about climate change preparedness, right, which is a very valid conversation to have, right? Especially like coastal cities, right? How do we need to prepare with our infrastructure if we're expecting ocean levels to start rising and things like that, or in a like emergency preparedness sense.
Well, how do you deal with so long of drought and not enough crops for X amount of people, and that's just that cycle is going to loop and get worse and worse and worse and worse, right?
Right. So if you want to think about this from like a public policy standpoint, right, which is a great also hi Brick with Eyes. Whatever happened to me, I had a baby. That's what happened to me. Sorry, I see in chat they're asking how I am and like where I've been for a year. Yeah. It turns out babies need a lot of attention. Who'd have thought?
Go figure.
Go figure. Yes. Okay, so public policy point of view. Preparedness. Yeah. So again, where I'm from, out here in Oklahoma, where our weather tries to kill us all the time.
Of course. As you do.
Emergency preparedness for tornadoes and thunderstorms and flooding, right? This is a very common conversation to have. And it's kind of a very so I'm used to even just growing up, right, like whether people would come to your elementary school and teach you what to do for different weather hazards,
right? Like we get tornadoes in this area and they've been getting worse and worse every year, right? And so this is the same kind of thing. They're not, the tornadoes aren't worse, their frequency and where they're popping down is expanding.
Yeah, so if you're getting more tornadoes, tornadoes don't care if they pop up in a field or in the middle of a city, right? And so you might be like out here more likely to pop up in the middle of a field than you are in a city. But if we're now having more tornadoes, the probability of us hitting cities is going up, right?
And the number of cities you're making is also more.
Also going up. Yeah. And so it's important to think about budgets, because like natural disasters cost money, right? It's billions of dollars a year. And so how is your area going to prepare? Like I said, the easiest way to think about it is whatever you already deal with, that but worse, right?
It's one of those
So
things where you start looking at politicians, because this is policy. You start looking at politicians and you say, listen, I don't care if you believe whether or not climate change is real or true or whatever. We still have to deal with the consequences of what is happening and what it's going to look like. So whether you believe it's going to happen or not, the tornado data is the tornado data, period. It is on an upward tilt. It is, we're seeing this, and this. And so what are you, politician who may or may not believe whatever science you may or may not believe, are going to do about this very real thing that is happening in real time?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are the places where you can like, hey, this has been the trend in our area for the last 20 years, right? And most areas in like the developed world are going to have that data really readily available. This is the frequency of droughts. This has been the frequency of wildfires. This has been how much that has cost, right? Here's where we should be spending money into infrastructure, into preventative measures.
Well, it's just straight up resource is good resource management on top of like smart capitalism, right?
Yeah, that's all it is. And you don't, to do that well, you do not have to think climate change is man-made, right? You don't even have to think that global climate change is real. You just have to like believe the person who's been gathering data for 20 years isn't lying to you. You know?
And like you can even double check that through multiple sources. So if you don't believe that guy, you can literally just go and count yourself at your local library if you really want to.
Exactly. It's not big, complicated climate model output, right? Now, if you're willing to trust that can be useful, because then you can get a sense of like, okay, forecasts.
You're gonna make more pragmatic decisions because you'll have better information.
Exactly.
So that way
you'll have better information.
Decisions are gonna be better prepared. Yeah.
Right, but even if you don't want to touch climate data, right? If you don't want to touch climate model data, just look at the records for your region again for like the last 20 years. 20 to 30 is a good window, and look at a trend. How is what have been going on with droughts? Blah, because most interannual variability, like El Nino, La Nina cycles, those happen over like a decade, right? And so if you're looking over 30 years, you're not going to be like, oh, it spiked so much. That was like an El Nino year, right? That was we had that cycle inside of it. So a 30-year average is kind of the normal. That's actually the normal average that's used to say this is a climatological average.
I mean, it seems unlikely that if you're in Canada or if you're in America that you shouldn't be able to get 50 years. 50 years seems like an easy number, like an easy ask for that information.
Yeah, that would be a really easy ask. And actually you can get, if you're willing to go a little coarser on the data, there's the European Center, ECMWF. European Center for Medium Range Forecasting.
ECMWF.
They have.
Is it weather forecasting?
Yeah. Medium range weather forecasting, I think. So that organization, which is like the European Union's version of like the National Weather Service down here. What is Canada's equivalent of like the National Weather Service? Maybe the Canadian Weather Service? I don't know. I'm assuming you have an organization.
Probably. I'll find out while you're talking, though. Here's the website for anybody who is interested in looking at it.
So what they make is called reanalysis data, which is a global data set on as fine a resolution as like 0.25 of a degree, which gets down to like an average of like 30 kilometers, right? So a 30-kilometer grid globally.
Right.
And what they do is they take all surface observations from like local weather stations. They take satellite data. So they take all weather data anywhere in the world and smash it all together, right? And have made a record
Right.
that goes back. It's like really good from 1979 forward
Oh
because
wow.
that's like satellite era starts there. But I
Oh, that makes
think their
sense.
record goes back to like 1950.
So there is
So
historical data from Environment Canada,
mhm,
which is the government website,
okay,
but there is also something called climate data for a resilient Canada, which is climatedata.ca. So there's also that. So
yeah,
it looks like if you're Canadian, there's a couple of different options.
yeah. So the ECMWF, that's one of the great things about weather data is pretty much everyone in every country has
Collecting
agreed
everywhere.
to collect everywhere and share it freely with anyone who wants
Thank
it.
God.
Um, right, because it's
Because they
a
don't do that with
tornadoes and
everything.
hurricanes. They do not, but meteorology is really good about it because tornadoes and hurricanes don't care about borders, right?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
And
Yep.
so in general, that's like a there's a sub unit of the UN that has to do with the Meteorological Organization, and
Right.
so like there's kind of standard practices about sharing data because it makes everybody safer, um, which is really great. I really like that my
I'm
field does
absolutely
that.
pro that thing. I am 100% pro that
Yeah,
thing. That should be in all the things.
agreed. And actually, part of that like spirit is almost every climate model is open source. Most
Nice.
climate and weather forecasting models, all of the code is just free online for anybody who
So
wants
for
to look at it and learn how
anybody,
to run it.
yeah. So for anybody who doesn't know what
Yeah.
that means, it essentially means that you can look at the model, you can look at how the model was made. So if somebody in your government is telling you this is what a model says, you can actually go and look at the program they used to get that model. So if you want to know if they're lying to you can find that out.
Yeah.
That's how you would find that out. You
And
could
if
look at their model and then you can compare it to like another one and compare
you
it to
could
another one and see if they're consistent.
you could run the model yourself if you can
Yep.
learn the programming language, right?
Yes.
Like you can do this for yourself. And yeah, these are
Mm-hmm.
all open source code that you can just go to GitHub and download it. Um, uh, yeah. So that's very fly. There's a fly in my trying to get into my water. And it's
They're coming for you.
unacceptable. Hmm. Um, so um, yeah, so like here in the States, we have a program. The American Geophysical Union has a program that pairs uh, like volunteer scientists with local government actually to work on like just answer questions in that like policy standpoint.
Yep.
Um, and so that's I want to get involved in that a lot. But ugh, God, baby, turns out needs a lot of attention.
It's almost like you're busy
Baby
or
and
something.
dissertation. It's almost like I'm busy. It's almost like I have like responsibilities and pressures on my
Ew.
time. Ew. Um. So, yeah. So the fact of the matter is, right? So if we're thinking about this, so if you want to think about this is always something I like to bring up because people don't like it when I say that there is a very little that the average individual can do to mitigate the
Yes.
effects of climate change. There's effectively
Correct.
nothing. Now listen, if you're Caitlyn Jenner or Taylor Swift, like yes, you have measurable emissions. You could make different choices
If you're
and
flying around
affect
in a
that.
jet by yourself or with just you and your friends, fuck off kindly. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, especially if you're doing listen, if you're gonna doing that once a year, whatever the rich people do stuff. But if you're doing that like on a Tuesday, jeez. Ugh. No.
God, we're
Right,
gonna have the
so
Taylor
but
Swift fans coming after us. How could you do this to me?
how could I'm so sorry. But something if you wanna
I've
know
been destroyed. I've been set up.
I've set you up for failure. I'm so sorry.
Mm.
Sorry, it's hot here, my hair's going up. Um Okay, so something that you as an individual could actually do to mitigate the effects of climate change for your local region would be go learn about how the weather in your region has been affected and changed over the last 30 years and bring that to your local representative, right, as a policymaker, or get involved with like conservation efforts. There are in the US, there are like climate we have regional climate centers, and their purpose is to work with local communities to build resilient communities that are prepared for the future, right? So in with these wildfires, that might look like, hey, can we change the way we do these controlled burns? That is going to be safer, right? Like that's a great question. I really hope someone is working on. You know, so like land management is incredibly important in terms of climate resiliency. If you're in agriculture, right, you might think about, hey, how is the climate in my region changing, and what does that mean for the types of like stressors my crops are going to experience, right? Is there a type of like pest that's more common if it's warmer or drier, right? Or more wet or more moist, right? So if you're like, hey, over the last 30 years, we've been getting more like this, you know, should I plant this strain of wheat that's more drought resistant next year instead of this one, right? So like those are things that you could actually do that are going to positively affect your area's climate resiliency.
If you happen to do a smaller garden in your backyard, knowing what kind of weather you're going to deal with might help you decide on what things you want to plant.
Yeah, absolutely. Or like what pollinators are struggling in your area because of climate change. Can you plant the appropriate plants to support those insect populations?
Can you get a bee box?
Yeah!
Everyone should get a bee box because 1, honey is really fucking expensive, and 2,
and delicious. Bees are great. I want a bee box. I want my whole backyard to just be a meadow.
There's a bunch of bees that have moved into a giant shed in my backyard, and I hate the giant shed, so I'm like, live there, go!
Live there, enjoy!
Yeah, please!
I love it.
But, like, these are all things that...
Love it.
It's really just a matter of, like, you might not as an individual be able to do much, but you as, like, a block might, you and your neighbors might be able to, like, get together and be like, hey, we're all gonna drop $50 to get a bee box for the neighborhood. And then, like, build a couple over a couple of years, so then suddenly you've got because they're expensive. But if you've got, like, 10 families getting together to get one over the course of a year, it's really not going to cost you that much. Or something like sharing whatever crops you got, putting something, whatever you can do. But also, corporate.
And then also thinking about advocating for policies, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, how do we affect...
Yeah.
How do you affect corporations? You have to implement regulation, which has to come from a government source, right?
Yeah.
That's how it works here in the good old US of A.
Your politician doesn't have to believe climate change is real, but your politician does need to be looking out for you, and if that weather is going to harm you, like the wildfires have, then your politician should care about that and should do things about it.
Right, absolutely. Or frame it in a way that is advocating for policies for clean water and clean air, right? Because the policies that get you locally clean water and clean air are the same policies that reduce emissions, right? It's the same things, but it's a lot harder to be mad It's a lot harder to be mad when you're like, what I want is clean drinking water. Right? That nobody's gonna be like, climate change is not real. It's like, fun fact, I'm not talking about that. We're talking about clean drinking water.
Sometimes looking at a really big problem like climate change, however you believe it's coming about, sometimes it's easier to look at the smaller steps you can take instead of trying to deal with such a major problem all at once, especially since it is something that everyone's gonna have to work on. In your local case, you might be able to instead be like, hey, what can we do about X, Y, or Z that is a local problem for you? Because it's likely that local problem will also help on a far larger scale once it's everybody's little local problems all put together.
Right. So that's
obligatory fuck Nestle here.
Yeah. So like whether or not you recycle, right, your class, right? Whether or not you as an individual do that, it's gonna have absolutely no effect on climate change. Sorry.
Right.
And frankly, whether or not every regular citizen does that, probably not gonna affect climate change. Because it comes down to the corporate level systems, right? It is like the fact how far does your food transport, right? And so
Right.
um farmers markets are great. A farmers market doesn't solve that problem, right? 1,000 farmers markets doesn't solve that problem, right? Transitioning to clean energy solves that problem. And so
Right.
you've got to look at so like Europe. Europe is doing an amazing job at leading policy change, right? And going like we need to not just go carbon neutral, we need to be carbon negative, right? Actively removing carbon from the atmosphere or have processes that remove, yeah, we
Yeah,
need
I
to be
saw.
carbon negative in a few decades. And
I
that's like
s-
the goal of like that's the policy goal under the current administration. Per the DOE talk I heard at the last AGU meeting, you
I
know.
did see that there was an article that I saw that had Switzerland backs a net zero climate law in a referendum, and it says amount of 60% of Swiss voters have backed plans to severely cut emissions by 2050 despite opposition from the right-wing Swiss People's Party. In a second vote, 78.5% supported a minimum tax of 15% for multinational firms. So that's national.
That's awesome.
That's
Yeah,
that's affecting everything. So
yeah.
their
So that's
goal is,
awesome.
yeah, the Swiss population sent out a strong signal. Yeah, get the hell out of here. Strong signal. The law for bringing the country to a net zero emissions was accepted today. What started with the hashtag Glacier initiative several years ago has now come to an end. Very happy that the arguments of climate science were heard. So good
And you know,
job,
I'm
Switzerland.
not gonna lie, I'm not surprised that it's more Nordic countries leading this because of Arctic amplification. They're affected
Yeah,
more,
yeah, it definitely is
right?
going to hit them harder, faster, stronger, and
Yeah.
then they're going to be like,
And so,
"Oh wait, they have it's a very direct line. There's
yeah,
not additional inferences in the way."
right, right. It's a little clearer there because again, warming happens twice as fast at the poles than it does the rest of the
Yeah,
planet. So yeah, I'm not surprised it's countries like Sweden that are leading the way. So like we can get into like the global politics of this, but like I'm not even in policy. You know, I am just
right.
one lowly scientist
Yes.
who studies Arctic sea ice. And you know, we are all just like regular people here. So thinking about what can regular people actually do. Again, you can do a lot to advocate for your region's preparedness for climate, right? And so that's for climate change. Um, uh, so sorry, I'm so thirsty.
Not where you are.
I had like practically lost my voice yesterday because of the cold I had because the shares are cold. So I was really worried I wasn't gonna be able to
And like
talk, and
you're
then I was
not.
like, I'll get
It's not like you're not exhausted too because you're working on your dissertation. You've also got baby. You're here talking to us. And you've got this whole
yeah.
other side gig that you're diving into to avoid working on your dissertation.
Uh-huh. Yeah, no, I'm designing a quilt that's using only materials available pre-European contact to the Cherokee Nation is the plan.
I can't wait to see it when it's
Anyway,
done.
it's gonna be so cool.
It'll be so cool.
But it's gonna take forever, but it's gonna be great. Um
And so here's the thing: Mr. Serious makes an interesting point, right? Because
yeah.
I think this is a thing that is problematic. That is the kind of a little bit of the
Hmm.
crux of what we're getting at. He says our politicians, as an American, have
Yeah.
have a very solid strategy. It's called just deny climate change is happening, then you don't gotta worry about it. And I think that's what we're saying when it
Hmm.
says instead of advocating against climate change, advocate for
Hmm.
things that are going to make your local areas better and like your regional areas better and your individual
Hmm.
state better in general that are smaller things rather than saying you state you Ohio
Yeah.
need to do this whole thing that's gonna save us all. It's like, no, you Ohio, you Flint, Michigan, need to make sure you have drinking water for your people, and you need regulation to protect those waters so your people have something to fucking drink.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
It's incredibly pragmatic when it comes to a capitalist standpoint. It's better to invest a smaller amount now as insurance than it is to try and deal with the exponentially larger cost of trying to fix a problem after it already has happened, and now it's a disaster, and people are dead.
Exactly.
Infrastructure is destroyed, and we have to pull everything apart and rebuild it, which is incredibly expensive.
Yeah, and so, like, by the way, if somebody in chat happens to be like, my job is climate policy and I work on Capitol Hill, right? Then amazing, you can do a hell of a lot more.
Oh yeah, you need to be on this.
you worry about that global
political
standpoint. I believe in you, but that's not my job, right? I'm not on Capitol Hill. I'm in Oklahoma. And so, like, most of us don't have that type of influence.
I'm gonna turn 40, and I'm going to have, like, ingratiated myself in politics for the past 5 years once I turn 35, and when I'm 40, I'm gonna be, like, sitting in a congressional seat somewhere in, like, Canada's House, and just being like, I used to do YouTube. Fuck you guys.
I love it. Oh my god. Yeah, because there are there are very practical things that you can do. So a great example. This drives me absolutely insane when people in the U.S. complain about, like, NASA's budget. Right? Why are we investing in NASA when we have these, like, social problems at home? Right? NASA pays for itself every hurricane season.
Yeah.
Right? Because NASA runs our weather satellites, right? Like, they put those satellites into space, right? And, like, the forecast skill we get out of weather satellites for things like hurricanes and being able to give people days of advance notice, absolutely, like the billions of dollars in, like, life and lost property that saves every year. More than pays for NASA's budget. So, like,
it's because people think that all NASA does is unga bunga shoot rocket into air, the end. And, like, no, that's SpaceX. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah, that's SpaceX.
And half the time SpaceX doesn't even make it that far.
Yeah, jeez.
Fight me, Elon bros. Speaking of obnoxious satellites that are just going to decay and cause us problems in the future, how's Starlink doing?
Space junk is a real problem. Space junk is a thing. That's a different stream, though. Space junk is a real problem, though.
Another day.
Yeah. So if I was talking to what you referred to as the Texas of Canada, if I had the opportunity to speak to, like, would that be the provincial governments?
Yes. That would be she
cool.
would be the premier. So, like,
the premier. Okay.
Yeah. So there's, like, the prime minister, and then each province has its own, and territory has its own premier. So, like, there's one for the Yukon, there's one for Alberta, there's one for Ontario and Quebec.
And then do each of those
is the premier for Ontario.
Okay. So do each of the provinces and territories have a legislative branch as well?
Yes, yeah. So they'll have their little internal legislative branch, which is then kind of operates similar to, like, how states have their governors and they're allowed to do legislation within that state, and then you have the federal government over top. We have the same kind of thing. It just functions it functions a little differently. It's the same concept.
Okay. Gotcha. Because like, we at the state level have, like, a state senate and a state house of representatives. Anyway. And so I was so you guys have that too. Cool.
We have something similar to it. It's functionally close enough that it's like you'll have, like, your premier, and your premier will have, like, kind of like a mini cabinet, and that mini cabinet will make decisions, and then but you can also have, like, opposition speaking against, and yada 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 yada, at, like, city meeting or provincial meetings and politics.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if I was gonna get to talk to, like, the premier of, like, Alberta, Ontario, and like, those, like, legislative bodies, and and they wanted, and I was able to give them advice, right? My advice would be, in terms of wildfires, is that it's this problem isn't going to get better on its own, right? It's not going to get better without y'all devoting. I don't know if I'd probably say y'all. I don't know. We'd see what they would respond.
It's appropriate in the Texas of Canada. You're fine.
Yeah, there we go. That like this problem isn't going to get better without y'all acting on it, right? And in fact, without action, it's very likely to get worse, right? Because systems don't just get to a good state and stay there forever without input, right? Once you've got to get them to where you want them and then maintain it. You have to stabilize it and you have to maintain it. And so that would be, hey, let's look at how we do controlled burns. Is there can we improve that? 2, how well is our firefighting service sufficiently funded? And can we develop like a better plan for wildfire management when it's gotten like out of control, right? And I'm not even saying that like they're doing a bad job, just from an organizational standpoint, right? It's always like I don't know, this is a phrase we learned when I was in the Navy, an attitude of continuous dissatisfaction. Right? You should right
don't get complacent.
It's this idea of because we often have this idea as like we're working to this goal, and when we get to the goal, we're done. And that's not a good attitude to have. It's the continuous improvement. So we should always be dissatisfied with where we're at, right? We can always do better.
Are we the Jetsons yet? No. Right? Shut up.
No. And that's not to say that there isn't like a okay, this is good enough for now, right? Like small,
you can plateau. You can plateau and be like, this is a good resting spot while we figure out what we want to do next and where we need, because it's good to make assessments. So right now I'm doing a new workout program, right? And I've dedicated it to do it for a month. But what I'm doing is after a month, that doesn't mean I'm just going to stop. It means like after a month I get to reassess and make whatever changes I feel like I want to make to it. So like, do I want to do more of this? What is my next goal now that I've started to build these habits? Because the first month is just about building in habits. I'm not even looking for change yet. I'm not going to look for change until I've actually built the habit. Until the habit exists, there will be no change.
Exactly. And so like I'm a big fan of the idea of, so like there's kind of 2 things.
Do you want your dog to get sick? Do you want your dog to get sick like wildfires? No, Doug Ford.
Right. Yeah. So like 1, we perfect is the enemy of good, right? And so you don't want to like we're gonna just overanalyze this and end up doing nothing.
If it's not perfect and it doesn't do all of these things, then we can't do anything, and then you're stuck in paralysis. And we've seen that a lot from politics in the last 20 years, 30 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So like perfect is the enemy of good, right? If we don't like where we're at, we can take improvement, right? And if you combine that with the sort of continuous dissatisfaction, right, then we should, that if you merge those 2, then we can be like, okay, yeah, let's do this. We know we can enact this one thing. Let's do that and then step forward, right? So you brought out the idea of Flint, Michigan, right? Yeah, Flint, Michigan should focus on getting clean drinking water to its citizens, right? That should be their first and currently only goal, right? And once they've accomplished that, then they can look at the next thing.
Next step. Baby steps.
Then they can look at the next steps.
Do people fall through the cracks and get left behind when there are baby steps? Yes. But there's nothing. What are you going to do? Leave everyone to suffer?
Right. And so
that's your only other option.
Like that's the sorry, a fly just flew in my face. Okay.
I was wondering what that was.
That was it like hit me in the nose.
That's the government spy fly.
out,
it's trying to shut you down.
Yeah. Turns out, large systems are designed to help large swaths of people, right? And so they're good at working on like groups. They're bad at working on individuals,
Yes.
right? And so like you can think about, you kind of need a twofold approach. One is going to be from that like government large organizational standpoint, which is going to be how do we like because it's a difference between public health and going to your doctor, right? Public health isn't really concerned about individuals, it's concerned about populations, whereas your doctor is concerned about you, right, as the individual. And so like that's there's this
two
those
different
are two
sets
sides
of systems, and they
They're two
have,
di-
it's a Venn diagram. It's a Venn diagram,
Right.
So it's like they do have
Right.
overlap. It's designed to help
Yeah.
you in a general sense, but you, the individual, are going
Yeah.
to have individual needs that the system, the overarching system, can't address because that would be impossible. It's by
Right.
design.
Right. Yeah. It's systems that are designed to work on populations don't work on individuals, and things that work on individuals don't work on populations. It just doesn't work, right?
As soon as you can turn people into numbers to get data. You can't make decisions forgetting that those data points are people.
Right. And so like I think that's important that when you're designing policy, right, or advocating for policy, or even just like in your day-to-day life, right? There is no perfect system, right? There is no perfect system. So it's important to think about how you want the system to fail, right?
Right.
So like if I'm designing an experiment and I'm going to use a computer model, right? I was like, okay, I will not perfectly capture temperature, right? So do I want it to fail to warmer temperatures or fail to colder temperatures?
Right. Because you can build that into the system. So you can say that.
Exactly.
So anytime you, and like I think of this from like a PR's perspective, right? So when you're doing a channel or you're doing things in your day-to-day life and you need to present any kind of information, you need to make sure that the people who aren't going to like your message, because there's going to be people who don't like your message, are the right kind of people. It's the same thing like anytime you're dealing with any kind of very, very like polarizing political topic. So like if you're talking about LGBTQ rights or anything like that, you want to make sure that no matter what you're saying, you're going to be disliked. So you need to make sure that the people who are going to dislike you are not the people you're trying to help.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So like from a science standpoint, I think about like if my hypothesis is that if the temperature being warmer would support my hypothesis, then I have to design the experiment to default to the colder. Does that make sense? Right.
Yeah. Because if it goes colder, it means the hypothesis didn't work. So you need to make sure that you're
right.
To be
so
right.
Like if I design,
you're not wrong.
Yes. Yeah. So like, and I can't design my experiment to favor my hypothesis, right?
That's cheating.
That's cheating. That's cheating. But yes, yeah. So like thinking about where's our system going to fail. So bringing that back to like climate advocacy, right? You're not going to prevent all forest fires. You're not going to prevent, right? Like there will be a wildfire that gets out of control. 100% containment isn't a realistic goal, right? So you have to plan for that failure.
Do we want it to fail towards the population, or do we want it to fail towards the mountain range?
Right. Or can we cause that, like, can we have a system in place so that if it does get out of control, we have put in limitations on how far it can spread, right? Or we've, or this is our response plan for how we're going to respond to that.
Yeah, we have backup plans. Backup plans amongst backup plans.
Exactly. So just like making sure that that's all like planned for. Yeah, that's kind of my thought.
I think that's great. We have been live for an hour.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a really good place to wrap if you want to wrap, unless you have like a whole...
Yeah.
I know how sometimes you got plans upon plans, like we were just talking about.
No. We're good. I got my little spiel. So just my reminder, here's my spiel about like, hey, how is climate change going to affect you?
Yeah, please.
Again, think about the climate hazards that you deal with. And so That's things like what types of storms do you deal with, right? What type of weather-related natural disasters? The best way to understand how climate change is going to affect you is that those things are going to get worse. And the reason for that, right, is that weather is caused fundamentally by energy in the atmosphere, right? There is
And we
energy
need
in the
that.
atmosphere.
That's important.
It is. It is. But so all weather in our on planet Earth is driven by the fact that the equator is warm and the poles are cold, right? And so nature does not like dichotomies, right? It wants to even that temperature out. And so air and oceans move, right? To physically transport the warm air to where it's colder, right? Now, all that gets complicated because the Earth is spinning and we have water in our atmosphere, and so that condenses out and rains and does stuff. And then there's things like topography, there's mountains that get in the way, and so that messes with our weather.
Advanced magic school bus.
Yeah, advanced magic school bus. But the more energy we put into the system, so with a warming planet, then that can translate directly to things like kinetic energy, right? That can straight up mean stronger winds. Everything is moving faster and more chaotically, right? If we were to cool down, right? If we were to start go towards where we were at the end of the last ice age, then those effects of like these wildfires would become less common. Hurricanes would become less common. There's less energy in the atmosphere to run amok, right? So that's kind of big picture. So again, the things that you don't like happening where you are, those are probably going to become more likely.
And especially if something like, if you're used to something happening like the next couple of cities over, start expecting to see those things happen in your area and start warning and talking to the people around you to say, hey, what do we do if that starts happening here because it's spreading? And so, like, again, whether or not you want to blame humanity for it, or whether or not you want to blame something else for it, or whether or not you want to say it's totally natural, it doesn't change the fact that you're going to have to deal with whether, like, that thing that is going to drop on your head, wherever you think it's coming from, is irrelevant. My unfinished theory for 5 said, do toilets in Australia swirl the opposite direction? After all, they drive the other side of the road.
Okay, so they actually don't swirl the opposite direction, but their hurricanes do. Their hurricanes go the other direction.
You do know that, like, a flat earther would be like, but the toilet, though.
I know, because flat earthers don't understand fluid dynamics of scale.
No, just don't understand.
True. But it's the issue here is scale.
Scale.
Right? So
yes,
the thing that causes hurricanes to spin is Coriolis, which is conservation of angular momentum due to the fact that the Earth spins. And if you think of, do I have a globe near me? I usually have something. I usually have visual aids within grasp, but I don't today. If you have a sphere, right, and you draw a circle around the equator, that is bigger than if you draw a circle higher up, right? If you slice it, right? If you slice the top off of a sphere, it's a smaller circle than if you slice it through the middle, right? And so that means that as you're spinning, air at the equator, so like if we're thinking of so air at like 30 degrees north is traveling slower compared to air at the equator, because air at 30 degrees north is traveling a shorter distance as it moves around in a circle than air at the equator, but they complete the circle at the same time, right? So
like
as I move that like fast moving air north, it keeps that momentum and it starts in the northern hemisphere, air as it moves north curves to its right, right? And so that will be true as long as the Earth is rotating on its current direction. that's we would have to switch rotational directions to change that.
I'm just teasing.
So anyway, so that's what causes a hurricane to rotate counterclockwise, because you got a low pressure in the center, so it's all moving in, and it starts to turn to its right. Anyway, but a system has to be about order of magnitude 1,000 kilometers before it feels that effect. So you need anything that is smaller than 1,000 kilometers. The difference in momentum, that difference in speed, isn't noticeable, right? So you need to be at least 1,000 kilometers big. So the argument for, like, there's a great episode of The Simpsons where Lisa Simpson explains the Coriolis force and uses the Australian toilets to explain it. And it's a perfect explanation of Coriolis applied to the wrong system, because she applies it to toilets and they're actually too small.
Womp womp.
So the system is too small to be affected by Coriolis. That's actually why tornadoes can rotate either direction in either hemisphere. They do have a preferential direction, but it's not related to Coriolis.
That's fascinating. But
yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, Maddie. I greatly appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
I can't wait to have you on again.
It'll be so much fun.
And I'm happy for you and the baby. Hopefully you guys are feeling better soon. Congratulations to you. And good luck on your dissertation and your procrastination.
Hey, thanks. Speaking of procrastination, I am going to be doing...
I'm so glad you caught that softball.
Yeah. I'm going to be doing my a live stream on my channel on YouTube this Thursday. We're going to do some live debunking of a truly terrible argument against climate change.
Hooray!
Dapper Dinosaur is going to hop on and help me go through it. And so I'm going to try to get back to doing at least infrequent but regular live streams of live debunking climate nonsense on my channel.
So if you do want arguments about climate change and whether or not it's real, you need to go over to her channel directly. We didn't have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be fun. This one is based off of, what did they say? Oh, greenhouse effect isn't real because of Venus? They're trying to claim that there's no greenhouse gas effect on Venus. So.
Oh, okay.
It's really bad. It's so terrible. I'm so excited.
Well, I can't wait to hear that. That'll be Thursday. Do you know what time?
Should be 8 Central, so 9 Eastern.
9 Eastern, 8 Central, and that would be 9, 6. Ooh, so yeah, 6 PTS.
6 Pacific.
Yeah, Pacific. Yeah. So if you are so interested, I will make sure it gets linked down below. Thank you so much for joining me, Maddie. I greatly appreciate you and the time that you spend on this kinds of stuff. And I think that was a really great perspective about how to approach politicians and how to approach your, local area. So, hey, go check out your local area. And just for your own safety and your own, hobby, just go find out what your local weather's actually like and what's around you. Because I feel like that's information that people should probably have, and I just realized that I have none of that information. And I'm like, I feel like this is something I should know.
Local weather stations,
I live here.
That gather data usually self-contain their own records going back forever. So as long as there's been a weather station near you, then you should have access to all that data. Anyway,
thank you so much for joining us. We're gonna get on out of here.
All right, bye team.
Bye.